U.S. President Joe Biden has issued his starkest warning yet to ally Israel that the U.S. will withhold some arms shipments if the Israeli military launches an attack on Rafah. He made those comments in an exclusive interview that aired last night on CNN.
If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong.
So that was part of the interview. In the course of the conversation, he also admitted the use of the American munitions by Israel. So far, the massive bombs in urban situations, he did admit that had resulted in the deaths of civilians. Israel's military took control of the Rafah border crossing with Egypt earlier this week. It instructed about 100,000 civilians to evacuate the eastern part of Rafah. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, estimates that nearly 80,000 of the people have done so since. Biden also told CNN in the interview the Israeli military has not yet entered the major population centers in Rafah, that he does not view the incursion as underway. But if Israel does, again, Biden says he will halt munitions shipments that would be used in those areas. He will continue to deliver the defensive weapons, such as would help the Iron Shield, the Iron Dome, but not anything that could be used in an offensive capacity by Israel's military. Let's take you to Israel next for live reporting out of Jerusalem this morning. Chris Brown is once again leading our CBC News team there and with me this morning. And I'm glad to see you, Chris, on a day of we really need to understand what the U.S. president is saying. It was a strong warning from Joe Biden. So what impact would halting U.S. arms shipments to Israel have in the war? Another way of saying is, could Israel go it alone without U.S. support?
Well, these are 900-kilogram bombs, 450-kilogram bombs, and we've seen Israel use them in northern Gaza, where they've taken out entire clusters of residential buildings trying to destroy Hamas's tunnels. But Palestinians claim dozens, if not hundreds of people have been killed or wounded in a single strike. And Rafah is now even more crowded than those northern cities were, so presumably the casualties would be even worse. But these are obviously just one type of armament that Israel has. Weapons like artillery shells can also pulverize people with deadly efficiency, and those have not been halted, although Joe Biden did seem to hint that that could be the next step. We've been talking to military analysts here, and they tell us that tactically, for the moment, this really won't be a huge challenge for Israel, but strategically, the point is really the message that it's sending to Israel's adversaries, essentially telegraphing just how wide the rift is between these two allies. The U.S. is far and away, Heather, the largest supplier of arms to Israel. Roughly 70% of Israel's imported weapons come from the U.S. So, yes, if that flow is choked off entirely, it would be challenging, but we're still very, very far from that.
You know, Chris, it took some time for the U.S. to even acknowledge that it had delayed that arms shipment. We didn't get that confirmation until yesterday. And then last night, Biden's first public warning to Israel and to Benjamin Netanyahu over the issues and arms shipments. So what's your latest assessment of the how deep the rift is between the two leaders?
Well, we're hearing today so far from some of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition partners, and they're furious. Somewhat predictably, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir tweeted out that Hamas now loves Biden, and the finance minister called for full conquest of Rafah. But public opinion here has been shifting. The polls appear to suggest that most Israelis now want their hostages returned from Gaza and the fighting ended. So many here, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu's opponents, would presumably support this U.S. move. We'll likely hear more from Netanyahu tonight. The War Cabinet is meeting. So far, the only official response from the government is a comment from the defense minister that Israel intends to follow through and meet all of its war goals.
And let me ask you finally this time, Chris, how could this warning from Biden, how could that play in the ongoing ceasefire negotiations?
Well, it would seem to be a clear message to Netanyahu from the U.S., get a deal done. The question is, will Netanyahu do that? If he does, dozens of Israeli hostages and many Palestinians who are detained or imprisoned in Israeli prisons, they could be freed, but at the cost of the far-right coalition members in the government collapsing the government and throwing Netanyahu out of power. The U.S. has said the gaps that it sees between Hamas's position and Israel's position are significant but bridgeable. So the issue now, I think, is will this shove by the U.S. help close those gaps, or perhaps make Netanyahu go in the other direction, Heather, that maybe it's better for him to take his chances with an invasion of Rafah?